From KUT News and the Texas Tribune, this is The Ticket.
We demand our liberty.
That American dream is pivotal for the future of our country.
Americans have come back from some pretty tough economic times.
But we can and must do better.
And we are going to make our country great again.
I'm Ben Philpott.
And I'm Jay Root.
This week on the show, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton kicked a little butt in the New York primary.
We'll talk with Harry Enten from 538.com about what happened and what it means in that all-important delegate count.
But first, Jay, as we get closer to figuring out who the Republican and Democratic nominees will be, we're getting closer to the ticket shifting from politics to policy. We've been talking for some time about doing some deep dives on the top issues for the 2016 election. So, let's kick it off just a little bit here. As it looks like we kind of know who the candidates may be, what do you think will be some of the top 2 or 3 issues for November?
Well, look, the economy's always a huge issue, right? And maybe this is because I'm in Texas and I've been dabbling a lot along our border. But look, border security and immigration just continue to drive a lot of the conversation. You certainly see that on the Republican side, and we now I think it looks pretty much like it's either going to be Trump or Cruz. That's what the smart people think. And both of them have made that front and center of their campaign. So, the economy, the border, those are the big issues, I think.
On the Democratic side, how quickly do you think, if we have Hillary Clinton as the nominee, and it does appear that she's continuing to be on that track, how quickly or how do you think she will attack kind of some of the Bernie issues that she's brought on to her own campaign as she's moved forward? How much do you think you'll hear about social equality and free college tuition once she's not having to deal with an opponent in the primary, but she's dealing with an opponent in the general election?
It's a very good point, and I think where you're getting at with your question is, and with this topic is, we all know that Hillary Clinton had to move to the left to beat, if she does beat, and it looks like she's going to beat Bernie Sanders. The whole Wall Street issue, punishing Wall Street, punishing bankers, that is something that I think you'll be hearing slightly less of from Hillary Clinton. But I do think it's a careful balancing act for her. She's got to get these people to come back out for her, at least some of them. I mean, she needs the enthusiasm and the enthusiastic voters that Bernie Sanders drummed up during this campaign.
I think it's interesting that in both parties we have kind of a real contrast between what the top issues may be, depending on if your first or second place gets in. We were just talking about kind of the differences with Bernie and Hillary. On the Republican side, between Trump and Cruz, I think, first of all, if Trump's the nominee, who knows exactly what kind of policies we're going to be talking about other than building a wall, making good deals, punishing China.
It's going to be great.
It is. It's going to be huge, however it is. But then, if Cruz were the nominee, we definitely, again, go back to the border. But, I think religious liberties will come up as a big issue. And I think it'll be interesting to see how some of these state party conventions from the Republican side, how issues that are bubbling up there push their way towards, especially if we're talking about a Cruz campaign.
You're not going to hear a lot of people talking about there's not a dime's bit of difference between the two parties. I mean, this is not that kind of election. It doesn't matter who wins either nomination now. The people that are in the top running on each side are so different from each other that voters are going to have a very, very clear choice come November. So I do think that you see a lot of differences between Hillary and Bernie, and you see a lot of difference between Ted and Donald, but it's nothing like what we're going to see in November.
Well, if you, our listeners, do have any suggestions for policy issues that you want us to dive into, send them our way, either on Twitter at TheTicket2016 or TheTicket2016@gmail.com. Here's the results. Donald Trump got about 60% of the vote and won 90 of 95 delegates. Hillary Clinton got 57% of the vote and 139 delegates to Bernie Sanders' 108. So what, if anything, does this latest result mean? Joining us to answer that and a few other questions is 538 senior political writer Harry Enten. Hello, Harry.
Hello.
We're taping this on April 20th. That's the day after the New York primary, and I know you had a really long night last night, so I do appreciate you joining us today.
No, my pleasure. Very little sleep, but I'm used to it by this point in the campaign.
Well, before we get into the delegate count, you got a chance to see the candidates up close there as they pushed to win New York. Did you see any of them really change what they had done from previous states? They had a full 2 weeks basically to attack New York.
I didn't see too much in terms of how the candidates shifted as much, as how they were received. So all of a sudden, Ted Cruz and his New York values line came back to bite him. And I think Bernie Sanders really tried to make a real play in New York. He'd been talking all about, I didn't really play in the South, which was why Hillary Clinton was able to win so easily there, without really acknowledging that the reason he really didn't do well in the South is because he simply doesn't poll well among non-white voters and African Americans in particular. And New York was a state where he came into play. They put a lot of money on the air. They vastly outspent Hillary Clinton. And the end result was that he lost by 16 percentage points. So to me, it was just very interesting to see how in New York, they paid back the people that they knew best, both on the Republican side with Trump and on the Democratic side with Hillary Clinton.
Bernie had a little boomlet after Wisconsin. Is it just over now?
I think, at the end of the day, this race comes back down to delegates and demographics. And on the delegate front, as you mentioned, Bernie Sanders is now further behind than he was coming into New York. He has a deficit of somewhere in the neighborhood of 245 elected or pledged delegates. It just, to me, when you look at the states that are coming up to vote, states like Pennsylvania, states like Maryland, states like New Jersey, states like California, these are all states where he would need to win by tremendous margins in order to catch Clinton in the delegate count. And in all of those states, the demographics, in fact, suggest that Hillary Clinton should win, and the polling reflects that as well.
I love the delegate tracker that y'all have there on 538.com, focusing on how on or off track a candidate is to try to get that majority of delegates before the convention. How did the Trump and Clinton wins affect that tracker? And you've already talked a little bit about how it affects Bernie, but...
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we've had these trackers, and we've also been updating the trackers in our own separate articles to try and figure out, so-and-so has fallen behind the pace, so let's see how much they would need to catch up in addition to how they would originally have to have done. And on the Republican side, the tracker shows that, yes, Donald Trump is behind. Despite winning New York, he was expected to do well there, and indeed, he did do a little better than we thought he was going to do, but that doesn't really impact how much he has to win by going down the road. I think the big primary on the Republican side is in Indiana in early May, and then following that in California. Those are the two states where I think we don't really know what's going to happen, especially in Indiana, and we'll have to wait and see. But for now, Trump is behind the pace, but a big win in Indiana followed by a big win in California could allow him to clinch the nomination with only elected delegates. On the Democratic side, look, Bernie Sanders, simply put, is just very far behind. He fell further behind by losing in New York last night, and because of the way delegates are allocated on the Democratic side, which is they're all proportional, he'd have to win somewhere in the neighborhood of 59% of the vote or pledged delegates going forward in order to catch Clinton in the pledged delegate count. And that, simply put, while possible in some universe, in the universe of which we live in, which voters are voting in a rather consistent manner with regard to demographics, it's just not going to happen.
I was checking on the tracker, and I think Indiana is going to, of course, be really interesting. I was looking earlier. Jay and I couldn't find any polling data on Indiana, which, of course, was really frustrating. But, the next week, we've got 172 delegates up in the Republican primary. Your tracker says that Trump needs 97 to kind of stay on track from where he currently is. But based on some of the polls I've seen, isn't there a pretty decent chance that he could have a better night like he did in New York?
Yeah. So remember, number one, this is, to stay on pace to where he is. And right now he's behind the pace according to the tracker. So even if he, matched it, he'd still be behind the pace. We expect him to have a very good night next Tuesday. I mean, Pennsylvania, he's led in all the polls. Maryland, he's led in all the polls. Connecticut, he's led in all the polls. In Delaware, we expect him to win. He's probably also going to win in Rhode Island. But the real question is not so much whether he wins in those states or wins large, it's whether he is able to make sure that he gets all the delegates he can possibly get. So in Maryland, for instance, can he win all the delegates that are at stake in that state? And indeed, some of the polls suggest he may lose 3 to 6 delegates in and around the Washington, D.C. area, or in a state like Connecticut where there's a 50% threshold to win all of the statewide delegates that are available. Right now, he's hovering right around there. Can he get over that 50%? Those are the questions that are going forward. But we expect Trump to do well. He'll probably do better than the target that we've set for on the page. But we then expect him to probably do worse in the states during May. So things have shifted a little bit from where we originally thought. But overall, he seems to be just falling a little short of where he needs to in terms of reaching the 1237 with elected delegates. He's probably going to need at least some of the unpledged delegates to reach it.
That's interesting that he would lose some of those delegates around D.C. Out of Maryland. Is that, I guess, where the Washington cartel is coming to support Ted Cruz?
I would say that it's probably where the Washington cartel is coming to support John Kasich, actually.
Yes.
I mean, if you look, for instance, last night in New York, there was one county that Donald Trump lost. It was New York County, a.k.a. Manhattan. He just does not do well among well-educated, wealthy Republicans. And there are a lot of those surrounding the Washington, D.C. Area in many of the suburbs. We saw that in Virginia. We'll see it again next week in Maryland. And Connecticut, too. We may see it in the southwestern portion of the state of Connecticut, where there are a lot of well-to-do suburbanites from New York City.
You know, we talk a lot about superdelegates on the Democratic side, but there are also superdelegates on the Republican side. It seems to be less talk about that, but we could get into a situation where we go into the convention and the superdelegates could hold the keys to this. Is that right?
Well, we should make sure we're clear here. There are unpledged delegates on the Republican side who are not necessarily members of the party. So superdelegates on the Democratic side are elected officials, you know, your congressman, your senator, or members of the Democratic National Committee. On the Republican side, what we're talking about with unpledged delegates are those who may have been elected in a county convention. So, you know, in the state of North Dakota, for instance, all of the delegates are officially unpledged there, but they were all elected via a state convention. They're not necessarily office holders, but they are probably going to hold the key. Those unpledged delegates on the Republican side probably are going to hold the key. If Donald Trump can win his fair share of these unelected or unpledged delegates, then he's probably going to win the nomination. If he can't do so, if, say, Ted Cruz runs away with them, starts putting up, 8 or 9 to 1 ratios, then it's going to be a very long road for Donald Trump in order to get to the 1237 mark.
In talking about that contested convention, a lot of people, I've seen some stories today saying that, based on last night's win, this cements the chance that the GOP will have a contested convention. But I guess there is still a chance that if Trump keeps this up and if he, makes some hay with those unpledged delegates, like you were just saying, that we could, I guess, still have a contested convention, but may not have to go past a first ballot with Trump.
Right. So we should be very clear in saying that a contested convention doesn't necessarily mean that we have more than one ballot. I think Ted Cruz is going to go into that convention and try and hope that he can somehow get to being able to stop Donald Trump from reaching 1,237. But it is very possible that Trump is able to win on the first ballot. I'm not sure how likely that is. It may be 50-50. But if Trump is going to win, he'll need to win on the first ballot, and he has at least a decent shot of doing so.
Yeah, we'll have that state convention coming up here in Texas in just a few weeks, and Cruz supporter will be every single one of those delegates, whether they're for Trump or not. So
right, exactly, and that's the thing that will be the key going on to the second and third ballot is a lot of these delegates who will be initially pledged to Trump, once they become unpledging and vote how their heart desires. A lot of those delegates who have to vote for Trump on the first ballot, when they can vote how their heart desires, will end up voting probably for Ted Cruz and to a lesser extent John Kasich.
You talked about Kasich winning that Manhattan district there. Is it true that Ben Carson defeated Ted Cruz in one of the districts last night?
This is a very interesting thing whereby, I don't know how this is going to exactly work with a rules committee and a challenge, but Ben Carson was on the ballot in New York last night, but anyone who voted for him did not actually have their vote count. So in New York's 13th district, if you count the Ben Carson votes, in fact, Donald Trump comes in under 50%. However, if you don't count them and you just count the Trump, the Cruz, and the Kasich votes, he comes in over 50%. So by being on the ballot, and taking these potential votes away from Cruz or Kasich, Carson helped to ensure that Donald Trump won all 3 delegates.
Basically, there are going to be a lot of lawyers having a lot of fun as this moves forward, it looks like.
I would say that if you're a lawyer and you're involved with Republican politics, get ready to plan your wonderful Christmas vacation. This year you can go first class because you're going to be making a lot of money.
Harry Enten is a senior political writer for 538.com, and if you're not already listening to it, you really need to listen to the 538 Elections podcast. It really is one of the best covering the 2016 election. So, Harry, thanks so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's it this week from The Ticket. Want to send us a podcast idea? You can reach us on Twitter at TheTicket2016 or email theticket2016@gmail.com. You can find all of our episodes on SoundCloud, Stitcher, in the new Google Play podcast section, which should really be up and running any minute now, and of course on iTunes. And when on iTunes, please leave us a review. It really does help other people find our podcast. Jay, we got one new review this week. Somebody who said they really appreciated any podcast that mentions the musical Hamilton, which we did with the interview with Zoe Chase on the Hamilton rule and how Republicans may be using it to vote for Hillary Clinton this time around.
That's awesome. Well, you can also listen at theticket2016.com. The Ticket is a co-production of KUT News and the Texas Tribune. Our editor is KUT News managing editor Matt Largy, and our theme music is by Ben Root. Thanks for listening.